All right, history and geography of the Bible. I want to begin just simply by noting the fact that God created the heavens and the earth. In Psalm 33, or Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. In Psalm 33, it makes note that when God spoke it, it all came into existence. As we have recorded in Genesis 1, God said, "Let there be light." God said. And so God just commanded these things to come into existence, but He created a physical universe. He put these features in this physical universe and in the planet that we live on, whether that's the firmament of the air, the waters of the oceans, separating the waters and the dry land, putting plants, putting, fowl and fish and all of that, and the creatures that creep upon the earth, all those things. And then He put man in that environment. And so He's put us here on a planet, and our existence, our reality is in this planet, and we experience things that have to do with what is here. And so we live in a physical world created for us to exist in, if you will. So it sustains and perpetuates humanity. Let's go to Proverbs 30. Proverbs 30, and I would like someone to read verses 18 and 19, please. Proverbs 30, 18 and 19. Carter?
There are three things which are too wonderful for me, yes, for which I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a virgin.
Okay, so with the exception of that last one that's mentioned, I just wanted to note that as the wise man's looking out here and he observes the environment around him, there's things that he sees and he says, these things are wonderful, they're amazing, and they maybe are a mystery at times to look at them and to see them. And it's just the idea that God created a world in which it causes awe and wonder in us. Have y'all ever experienced that? Like you're just overwhelmed with what you're seeing, what you're witnessing. Okay, I can think of things like, to me, every time I'm in the Rocky Mountains, I'm filled with awe and wonder. I could just sit there all day and just look at those mountains. It's just gorgeous. Others, I don't know. What have you guys seen that it's just like, that's amazing, beautiful? Ron?
Similarly, when I was in the Swiss Alps, traveling over there, it was just unbelievable.
Right.
Like everywhere you look was a postcard.
Right. It's like, is this even reality?
Yeah.
It looks so beautiful, so pristine. Yeah, exactly. Swiss Alps. Somebody have another?
The first time my firstborn was handing on his face.
Okay. The wonder of humanity, just the human beings and little babies are, just them discovering their existence and that they have a hand. Yeah. It's a beautiful and it's a wonderful thing. And so it's here in part for us to have awe and wonder and to appreciate these things. But it also affects our life. It puts limitations on us, or it pushes us one direction or another. For instance, people who live in island nations, they have a very heavy seafood diet because a ready source of food is the sea. People who live inland, they're going to be eating different things. They might be eating cattle, they might be eating sheep or goats or something, or they might just be eating grains mostly. So it just really depends on those things, but where we live affects all of that, and we see that in the Word of God. Where they lived either limited them, it presented opportunities, it gave natural protection, or exposed them to certain things. So we're going to see that as we go through this. It's all woven into the Bible story. And what we want to note is we're going to go from our little world right here in Newton, North Carolina, or Statesville, or Denver, or wherever it is we live. We're going to go from that little world and travel over to the Middle East and look at the ancient people and ancient civilizations, events that took place over there, because these things that we're going to note are related to God's plan of salvation. It was not an accident that God chose that place, that time, to work through His people and with people to bring about the redemption of mankind. It's in this place for a reason. It wasn't just God saying, throwing a dart at a board, if you will. There's a reason behind it. And so one of the things we want to note is that these things took place at a time, and we're mostly focusing on the Old Testament, which is essentially looking at Asia, a pretty good chunk of Asia, most of it being there. Some of it's in Africa, down in, Egypt and whatnot. And then some of it's up in, technically, I guess, Europe, if you go up to Turkey and stuff. But most of it's in Asia and Africa. But these things took place from the beginning of time to about 2,000 years ago as we get into the New Testament. And the thing I want to emphasize in this series of studies is you can go there today and you can see the things they saw. You can walk either near or in the exact place where people from the Bible lived, where they existed, what they did. And that helps us to have a great faith that what is recorded in the Bible is not some fantasy, it's not something a person made up, that you can go back and, if you will, with a shovel, you can dig into the earth literally and find evidence of the things that are recorded here, either very specific people in the Bible that are mentioned there, or the cultures, the civilizations that existed in those ancient times. And so we can have great faith on that. So, of course, that previous one was the pyramids at Giza. This is a picture of the area where Mount Sinai supposedly is, and there's some debate on that, but that's in the southern Sinai Peninsula, so you can go there. Supposedly, I was standing on Mount Sinai when I took this picture. That's where Moses was, so I'm pretty sure that wasn't Mount Sinai, if that's where they say that it is exactly. But anyway, you can get an idea of what the place looked like and a better appreciation, because if you look at that, what do you notice? Yeah, it's not too bad getting to the top. It's not that high of a mountain. That is a rough climb. But there's no vegetation. And when you read about the children of Israel complaining about no food, no water, I'm going to tell you, if you ever go there, you're like, or I was like, yeah, I can understand why they were having troubles. They were struggling with this, because it's a barren area. But it, of course, helped to build their faith, and there's a reason God took them out into that desert. And so when we see these things, when we read about them, we can understand, oh, that's what this was all about. This is what it looked like for them and the troubles that they had. This is the Sea of Galilee, the Lord and His disciples on that sea many times. You can go over there. You can see that area. This is the supposedly one of the places they say, well, this could have been where He delivered the Sermon on the Mount, or the Sermon on the Plain, as Luke records it. They call it the Mount of Beatitudes, or the area of the Beatitudes. This is Jerusalem, of course. You can see ancient walls there. Where that big golden dome, that's called Dome of the Rock, that is where the temple stood at one time. You can literally walk over there. You can see it. And this right here is a picture of what's called the Wailing Wall. And you can go up and visit that. That is part of the foundation of Solomon's temple. So you can know this is it right here. Not that this is needed for our faith. Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the Word of God. But to see it and to be able to touch it, to me, it's an amazing thing. And it helps me to understand that what's written in the Word of God is absolutely true. And if there are things that I can't go see and touch, that tells me it's all real. It's all true. So we can see these things and we can have a better understanding of it. So, some of the questions that we had. If you were to visit the site of ancient city of Babylon, in what modern country would you be? Who's got the answer to that?
Iraq.
Yes. So, Middle East, you see Iraq there. You see, I put a little marker on that for ancient Babylon. You can, if you zoom in, and Lord willing, when we get to that study, we'll zoom in on it. You can see the ruins of the city of Babylon there in modern Iraq. There's some of the things you can see they've uncovered about Babylon. So some of the murals and things like that. Okay, if you were to visit the ancient city of Damascus, what country would you be in? What was that? I thought I heard it. Syria. Okay, exactly. It's in modern day Syria. Of course, Damascus is one of the most ancient cities in the world, and it comes into the Bible in multiple occasions. What's the one that you know most famously connected to Damascus?
Saul.
Yeah, Paul or Saul, as he's on the road to Damascus, then he goes on into Damascus, and that's where he was. A lot of evidence in Damascus of Christians in ancient times, very, very early on, of course. The Bible records that, and then archaeology confirms that. If you were to visit the city of Ur, what modern country would you be in?
Also Iraq.
Yes, exactly. A lot of it. It's kind of funny, isn't it, how a lot of this stuff is in a place where today we're like, I don't know about that place.
Even if you go back to the book of Jonah, the city of Nineveh, where modern Mosul is in Iraq, that's where the ruins are there too.
Yeah. When you look at it today, at least in my mind, you wonder, how could there be thriving, ancient, advanced, powerful civilizations over here? But they existed way far beyond what we see there today as far as advancement relative to the times and so on like that. All right, so what major caravan route ran north and south through the Canaan just east of the Jordan River? Okay, the King's Highway, of course. And the passages that we gave in there all confirm that or talk about those things. But you can see the King's Highway there just east of the Dead Sea running north and south. And there were several trade routes that ran through there. And that comes into play in the Bible. Does anybody know how? Why does it even mention these things in the Bible? Okay.
Well, perhaps because when the children of Israel went into the promised land and traveled up through there, they had confrontations with each nation as they went through there. Traveling up that way.
Right.
It was a power grip.
Yes, exactly. Because, of course, in ancient times, they didn't have highways like we have today. They had these routes that people figured out, hey, this is the easiest way to travel. Think about traveling with camels, think about traveling with carts, traveling on foot. Well, this is the best route to take, and it would become a common route, and the goods traveling over that the nations wanted to control that trade. And they would tax people coming along through there. And so if you controlled it, that increased your wealth. In various cities along those ways, like look over there to the northwest a little bit, Megiddo, and the trade route running down through there, the way of the sea, that Megiddo was a stronghold that helped to control that trade route. So they would be able to tax people. So those kinds of cities would be apt to be attacked if someone was trying to take over that trade and the taxation that went along with that trade. Now, what are some names of the land where God's people would dwell? Does anybody know some of those names? The common one we know is what? Before Abram and others went down in there. Yeah, Canaan land. Okay, so let's go back to Genesis chapter 10. Genesis chapter 10. And let's see how this name came to be. Genesis chapter 10 and verse 6. Who's got that for us? Genesis 10, verse 6. Go ahead, Jim.
The sons of Ham were Cush, Israel, Put, and Canaan.
Okay, so named after one of the descendants of Ham. If you drop on down a little bit, in verses 15 to 20, it talks about Canaan, verse 15, and the ones that he begot. And notice that it comes down to verse 18, the Arvadite, the Zimrite, the Hamathite. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed. And so they're identified very early as Canaanites. And so those are people dwelling in that land and forming various tribes and things like that. The promised land. Let's go back to Genesis 12, or forward, I guess, to Genesis 12. Genesis 12 and verse 7. Who's got that? Genesis 12, 7. Go ahead, Philip.
Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him.
Okay. So, why is it, of course, called the Promised Land?
The Lord promised.
Yeah, the Lord made a promise. He made a promise to Abraham, He made a promise to Isaac, He made a promise to Jacob. And then He fulfilled that promise when Joshua and the children of Israel went into that land. So it's the promised land. All right, and then also the land of Israel. Why is it called the land of Israel? Israelites. Why are they called Israelites? Philip?
Because the whole nation is a descendant of the man Israel.
Have that man get his name Israel.
God gave it to him.
For what? Why? What does it mean? Genesis chapter 32. Genesis 32. Remember, there was this man by the name of Jacob who was a descendant of Isaac. He was one of two boys to Isaac, the twin. His twin brothers, Esau. Jacob had to flee home because he had stolen Esau's birthright. And Esau was going to kill him, so he fled. He was away for 20 years. He comes back. Before he gets back and meets Esau, this incident takes place where there's a man that shows up one night and he begins to wrestle with that man, or what he thinks is a man to begin with, that then realizes later it's an angel. But let's notice Genesis 32, 26 to 28. Who's got that? Go ahead, Carter.
He said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed.
Okay, what does that name Jacob mean? Yeah, supplanter. And Israel means Prince of God. Okay, so there's a change in his name, the designation. So he became known as Israel. And then how did the Israelites come out of him?
12 tribes, sons of Israel.
Yeah, his sons. He has 12 sons, and those sons have children. And down in Egypt, they grow into a nation. So, yeah, that's how you get the land of Israel, because the promised land that they're given, they go in, they possess it, and then it becomes the land of Israel at that point. But there's that other name that's a weird name for us, Palestina. Does anybody know the history on that? Why is it called in modern times Palestine?
Wasn't that a derivation of Philistine?
Yes. And who is it that came in and said, this is what we're going to call it? The dominant power in the first century. First century AD. Yeah, Rome. Rome renamed it. There's a period of time around 135, I think it was, that when whoever was shuffling whatever, designating whatever, their provinces, territories, whatnot, they ended up naming it this, and that's passed down through time to become what we call Palestine today. But biblically speaking, really, we're talking about the land of Israel, the promised land, or Canaan land. All right, so names of God's people in the Old Testament. Of course, we've talked about Israel, which we'll not cover again, but what else are they known as? How are they designated or described?
Sons of Abraham.
Okay, sons of Abraham. Any others? What about Hebrew? Genesis chapter 14. In Genesis chapter 14, because, and you get into the New Testament, Acts chapter 6, what was the problem that came up in Acts chapter 6? In Acts 6, among the brethren, there was a dispute between what two groups? The Hebrews. The Hebrews and the Hellenists. In that case, it's talking about culturally, there were those Jews who were Hellenists. They lived in the Hellenic world, the Greek world, with Greek influences, styles, dress, language, all that. And then the Hebrews, which would have been the Jews from the land of Israel, that were more authentic, I guess you would say, more culturally Jewish in all of their things. So, but Hebrew, Genesis chapter 14, verse 13. Who's got that with us? Go ahead, Josh.
Then one who escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, brother of Aner, and they were allies of Abram.
Okay, this is pretty early on in Abram's time in the land of Canaan. He went down there. He had gone to Egypt because of a famine. He's returned back into Canaan. He's there. He and Lot have separated at this point. Somebody has captured Lot. Some kings came over from Mesopotamia and they captured Lot. And they go and they tell Abram the Hebrew. What does that name Hebrew mean?
Verse 13.
Yes, sir. Verse 13. The name Hebrew has a specific meaning to it. Mike? It carries that idea.
He's from the other side of the river or something like that.
Yes.
From beyond the
Yes, which comes into the idea of being a stranger. But yes, it's one from the other side. And what it's talking about, and we'll look at this in a little bit, but he's talking about he's from the other side of the river, the other side of the Euphrates. So he's a Hebrew. It's just their word for it. So one from the other side, and they came to be known as descendants of Abraham as Hebrews. identified closely with that. All right, then what about Jew? How do we get the name Jew? What are the 12 tribes?
Judah.
Okay, Judah, right? Judah shortened to Jew. It's something that's used later in the Old Testament. Particularly, you get to the books of Ezra, books of Nehemiah. But if you just notice Ezra chapter 4 and verse 12 there. Ezra chapter 4 and verse 12. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Philip.
Let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come to us at Jerusalem and are building a rebellious and evil city, and are finishing its walls and repairing the foundations.
Okay, so just very briefly, in this context, of course, it's post-exile. They had been carried off into Babylonian captivity. The Medes and the Persians have taken over. They've been allowed to go back now. And these are the people who are not happy about them going back. And it talks about that the Jews have come back and they're building this rebellious city. So how was the name Jew used frequently by non-Jews? I don't know how else to put it.
A negative connotation.
Yeah, they did. Generally, when they said he's a Jew, it was meant as an insult, as a slight. That this person's a no good person. And many times today, I think it's still used in that way among certain people. But you get it from because they come out of Judah. It's the dominant tribe in the south. They're the ones that the Davidic line of kings continued through. They're the ones generally who were brought back out of that Babylonian captivity. They resettled that land. And so the idea of Jew and Israelite, especially post-exile, becomes synonymous with one another. Just basically, if you're an Israelite, you're a Jew and Israelite. And it didn't matter which tribe. You didn't have to be of Judah to be a Jew. Paul was of what tribe? Benjamin. But he was a Jew, right? So it's not just strictly, but they came to be known as that, as a people. All right, any other thoughts on names of land, names of the people? All right, then. What about the size of the land? Anybody have any ideas about the size of the land? So if you're looking at the Fertile Crescent, this covers from the Mediterranean over to the Euphrates, essentially down through there to the Persian Gulf. That's the Fertile Crescent. Of course, you can see Canaan. It's not outlined there, but relatively speaking to that entire area, what size is Canaan? What size is Israel, the Promised Land?
Really relatively small.
It's a sliver in there. It's just a little sliver in there. So we'll talk more about kind of the topography of it in a little bit. But Israel is about, the land of Canaan, about 12,000 square miles. Anybody know how big the state of North Carolina is? Square miles? Let's try to get a comparison here. Think it's less or more?
It's a lot more. That's about the size of New Jersey, Israel. When you compare to New Jersey, and North Carolina would be, probably more than double that.
Yes. North Carolina is 53,819 square miles according to the interwebs. That means it's about 4.5 times larger than the land of Israel.
If you back up to that map you had before, Steve, I've seen the state of Texas laid over that area there, so that area is about the size of the width of Texas, and then you back that down into New Jersey for just the sliver that Israel is in.
Yeah, it is an incredibly small area and territory. You think about North Carolina, think about driving from western North Carolina to eastern. North and south is not so bad, but west to east or east to west from tip to tip, that's a very long drive. Now imagine taking that drive on a camel or on foot, and how long it would take you to traverse North Carolina. And North Carolina, as John's pointing out, North Carolina is not an incredibly large state. I mean, there are a lot of states, especially you get out west, they're huge. They swallow up North Carolina. But this is tiny. And I think there's a reason for that being tiny. From Dan to Beersheba, that is generally marked as kind of the northern point, the southern point. It would be like us saying what? Not Dan to Beersheba, but what? What's that?
Or maybe the Murphys, I would say, from North Carolina,
Oh, okay. That's new to me. That's a new one, but I'm glad all the North Carolina people maybe know that. As a country, what might we say? I think of New York to LA kind of as, that kind of marks it. It's really not the furthest points, but it gives you the concept of it. Here, you get the concept. It's the north, kind of the north and south. And so when you read through the Old Testament and it says from Dan to Beersheba, it's saying through the whole land. It's not saying technically from Dan to Beersheba, but it's just saying all over the land. So you've got the Gaza Desert to the Dead Sea, which is down here in the south. So you can, I don't know, you probably can't see it because it's really small, but it says Gaza over there. But from the Gaza Desert to the Dead Sea is only about 55 miles. And then the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan Valley further up, that's only about 30 miles. And Israel is very, very small compared to what we experience. Dan to Beersheba is 150 miles. So, I mean, in modern times, it would not take very long to travel throughout this land. But you think about, again, in ancient times, having to walk it, being on a camel, having a cart that you're dragging along, it would take quite a while to travel by those ancient methods. But because it wasn't extremely large, it did make communication and travel within the land easier. It was more rapid. And it would also help out in defense. Being a smaller area to defend, it would be easier to do that. So what about the importance of the land? So you can see where it is up here. Just, Jerusalem kind of gives you the marker for that area, even though it's not outlined here. But why do you think the Lord chose this area to put His people in these ancient times? What benefits are there?
We'll point out one of them. It's attached to the Fertile Crescent, so you could assume farming and agricultural uses are going to be plentiful with a land like that. It's also the only part of the area connected to the Sinai, which connects to the continent of Africa, which allows for easy, fast trade, such.
Okay. All right. So to that point, yes, on both. With part of the Fertile Crescent, there is a fertileness to it, and we'll talk more about that later. But you think about travel. If you're going by land from Asia to Africa, Europe to Africa, where are you going? You have to go through it. There's no way around that. Now, by the Mediterranean, you could get around that, but that was the exception. Just like in our day and age, there's an exception. We generally don't want to go over water. It's just more complicated, more expensive. it's cheaper to go over land. So we try to do that. So you think about this, they're traveling over land, and people who are traveling from one area to another go through this. And at this time, you think about these civilizations that are around it, whether it's Egypt or it's over there in the Euphrates Valley, and the nations and cultures that existed over there, going up into Europe and all of that. What would that do as people travel through the land of Israel? What kind of experience would that be for those people? So in the time of Saul, David, less so in Solomon, the time post-exile and people going through the land of Israel, what's going to happen? The time of Hezekiah, Josiah.
It's the nation devoted to their God.
You think about this is the nation, these are the people that are devoted to God. They're to be worshiping God, honoring God. Just imagine during the time of David, a traveler, let's say from over in Libya or even down in Egypt, and they go up through the land of Israel. What is there going to be a noticeable absence of? Idolatry. Like, these people are different. There's something different here. And they especially go into the city of Jerusalem and they see a tabernacle, or Solomon and post-Solomon, seeing that temple that's there. And it was one of the great wonders of the world that they see that. And it helped to keep the knowledge of Jehovah alive in an ancient world as people interacted with the Israelites and traveled through that land. So it would allow them to know about that. What about the law that governed the Hebrews? How was that in comparison to other cultures and nations?
Well, it's kind of like Ten Commandments was meant to treat everybody decent and respectable. I guess pagan countries didn't do that at all, and they tortured them. Didn't do what they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, they would have to be impressed with the structure of the law, the order of the law, the timeliness of the law, of all the things that were being observed, and that they were doing it without deviation as a nation of people. So it was extremely ordered as God had given it to them. Contrary to, as you remember, idolatrous nations, people doing things that they thought were right in their own sight, compared to a nation that is living under great structure, godly structure.
Okay, yeah. There are some ancient law codes that have been discovered, like Hammurabi, if I'm saying his name, and they're noticed to be superior to others in ancient times. But the law of Moses, that Hebrew code of laws, is considered to be far and away advanced of any other thing that existed in ancient times. So much so that our founding fathers essentially structured our nation off of the law of Moses. Like this is the way things, and they had studied lots of different ones in ancient times, and they looked at it and they said, here's the one that's the best. And it's generally recognized to be one of the greatest ones that has ever existed. So it treats human beings right. It shows respect for each other. It allows for people to pursue and prosper in the things that they want to pursue and prosper in. Jim, did you have something?
Yeah. If you're going to travel by land, then in that part of the world, one of the things you're going to, and you mentioned it before, you're going to need is water. And the wells are ancient, and ownership is ancient. And I don't know how it is today, but if you were not on the good side of the owner, you better not touch the water.
No, it pretty well they go to war over wells. Yeah, exactly right. All right, so God's put them there in this small little plot of land, relatively speaking. They have a strategic location for various reasons. Just some of the broader things. Over to the east, there's two great rivers, the Tigris River and then the Euphrates River. And in the Old Testament, if it ever says the river, it's talking about the Euphrates. So you just read through and it says from this to the river. That's the Euphrates, without question. The Tigris River is about 1,100 miles long. It's very turbulent. It's mentioned in Daniel chapter 10, verse 4. It's called by another name back in Genesis chapter 2, where it talks about these rivers and relative to the garden is Hiddekel, if I'm saying that properly. Euphrates, about 1,700 miles long. It's a little bit more of a meandering river that runs through the land there. It's named many places in the Old Testament. Around these rivers, it's considered to be the cradle of civilization. I mean, even when the modern archaeologists that dig through this, they recognize humanity came out of this area. And so it's generally believed that the Garden of Eden was in the southern part of this. Some people say it was a little bit more north, but probably the southern part of that area there, when you get down to Sumer and places like that, is probably where the garden located. There's the mountains of Ararat, which are famous for what? The ark. Ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. There is this desert. So if you look at the big picture, you have the Arabian Desert east of Israel, modern Saudi Arabia out there, but it's really just an extension of the Sahara Desert across Africa. It's just one huge swath of desert out through there. And so it gives you a pretty good perspective of what that place is like. There's a lot of nomads out in the Arabian desert, believe it or not. People who travel, they know how to live in the desert and they get along fine out there. But armies would avoid it because large armies, to Jim's point, there's very little water out there. They just can't sustain an army and all those animals and things like that traveling through it. Merchants generally would avoid that as well, but nomads knew how to live out there. Thinking about Egypt, a huge part of the Bible story, a lot of interconnections there. Think about that Nile River that runs down through there. The Nile River, does anybody know anything unique about it? Longest river in the world, over 4,100 miles. Jim?
Runs north to south.
South to north.
Yeah.
It runs south to north. Yes, I knew what you meant. It runs backward from what most rivers, of course, because the northern hemisphere has the most land, but most rivers run north to south.
The capital is Sudan, which is south of Egypt. You have two rivers that converge, the Blue and White Nile. They converge to form the main Nile River.
Okay, yeah. It goes way down into Africa and then it comes up into Egypt and opens up into that delta. It looks kind of like a flower up there, some people have described it as. But life is centered around that. About 90% of the population of Egypt has pretty well always lived along the Nile. There's very little precipitation in Egypt, of course. Whenever it does, it's a very unique event. Gets a lot of attention. You can see the southern part of the Dead Sea up there to the top of the picture. You see the Nile Delta over there to the left. The Sinai Peninsula, of course, is what is in between those things. And the Sinai Desert is very mountainous. That one picture I showed before gives you a little bit of an idea. Again, that Fertile Crescent. Now, thinking about the climate and the topography of Israel, has anyone ever been there to Israel? Okay. What does it remind you of, Pat?
I got my farmland out through there.
Okay.
Beautiful farms where they raise different things.
They do. Okay.
Olive trees,
Yes.
mostly where our olive oil comes from. Y'all,
Well, I know there's some there. There's a lot in Greece and Italy and things like that. But it reminds me of Southern California. Generally, what you think of as arid, but it's very fertile. It is a sunny climate very often. Very nice, very pleasant, most of the year round. It's wonderful. If you've never been to Southern California, if you go there and you're there most any time of the year, it's a very pleasant climate. Joyce, is that true?
true that is. I have a olive tree in my front.
Okay, and that's why millions and millions and millions of people live there, even though it's a miserable, terrible governed state, because it's just so nice there. Well, Israel is very similar to that. Very nice, but very fertile area. So think about this topography. This is a cross-section of north to south, so if you will, Dan to Beersheba. And it gives various elevations of things so that, you know, there's different mountains there, which, by the way, the highest mountain is what? Mount Hermon. About how high is that? Yeah, it's just a little under 10,000 feet. It's, I think it's snow-capped, if not year-round, almost year-round. And you can, in fact, there's a ski resort up there on it in modern times. They get enough snow there, which you wouldn't think of that. But even in California, you think about, you go from the coast and you go to the Sierra Nevadas, you have a rapid change in climate just in that short distance. But you have the highest place of Mount Hermon, and then the lowest place is what? The Dead Sea. What elevation is the Dead Sea? Does anybody know? And what's unique about the Dead Sea? Okay. The Dead Sea is about 1,300 feet below sea level.
It's the lowest place on Earth.
Lowest place on Earth, and it is stupid, stinky hot. It is bad hot there. And so I would not recommend going to the Dead Sea in the summer. Average temperature at Joppa out on the coast is around 67 degrees. Jerusalem is 63 degrees average temperature. That is wonderful for me. I would love that. Jericho, in the summer, it gets up to 110. So there's just a few things about it. Just we wanted to do kind of a general overview. Lord willing, in our next lesson, we'll start getting into more specifics about history and geography.